The European Commission has unveiled a plan to borrow on the market and then distribute to EU countries 750 billion euros in grants and loans to help them recover from their coronavirus slump. The loans is in line with suggestions of Germany and France, two largest European economies that opened the door to ensuring mutual EU debt last week. The economies suggested that the Commission should raise 500 billion euros on the public markets to be distributed as grants. But the richer states of the Frugal Four are uncomfortable with supporting the more indebted southern EU. The four states, Austria, Sweden, Denmark and the Netherlands, had signed and had signaled their opposition to an overly generous recovery fund. Their most important point is that aid mutualization and be closed after 2 years. A major part of the money will go to Italy and Spain, the worst affected by the pandemic. Both countries would together receive 313 billion euros in grants and loans. The 750 billion euros includes 500 billion euros in grants and 250 billion euros in loans to member states. Out of the 500 billion euros in loans, 310 billion will be invested in green and digital transactions. The aim of the package is also to protect the Europe splintered by divergent economic growth and wealth levels as the 27-nation bloc emerges from its deepest ever recession, which is expected this year. The grants are required as Italy, Spain, Greece, France and Portugal already have high debt and are heavily reliant on tourism that has brought to a halt the pandemic. They will find it more difficult than more frugal northern nations to restart their economies through. On this broadcast, we are now being joined by VN correspondent Lucy Hu, who's joining us live from Brussels. Lucy, the big question is the European bloc united as far as this plan is concerned?
We have an indication from the Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz on the day of this announcement that he felt that it was a good starting point for the negotiations and that it was, that there would need to be some compromise, but that he was encouraged by what he'd seen. But we know, as you were saying there is opposition from those northern countries, the Frugal Four as they're known, which is Austria, the Netherlands, Sweden and Denmark, about the concept of joint EU debt. Effectively, taxpayers in those countries being asked to foot the bill for pulling countries like Italy and Spain out of recession when Italy and Spain have been accused by some in the EU for having failed to reform their economies properly in peacetime, if you will, or outside of a crisis moment. So there is, everybody wants to ensure that the historic recession that is predicted is not as severe as is currently predicted to be. So, of course, countries want to lend a helping hand to those countries. It's how that is done. And certainly under this proposal from the European Commission, the bulk of the money would be issued in the form of grants, which would be borrowed by the European Commission on the financial markets and issued in a non-repayable form. The rest of the money, 250 billion, will be issued in the form of loans.
Lucy, you mentioned some of the big traditional powers like Italy, Spain, France all face debts. What's the stand of Germany, that is one of the biggest economies in the world and one of the most robust economies in Europe?
Well, Germany this recovery instrument, which would be issued in the form of grants. It was quite a shock announcement, particularly as a lot of people here in Brussels were watching what Angela Merkel was going to do with interest, in the sense that she's gained a huge amount of domestic popularity due to her perceived success in handling the COVID-19 crisis. So the COVID-19 crisis, or whether she was willing to gamble that political capital on becoming a European leader and doing something that might play into the hands of opposition parties at home ahead of an election year. But certainly